This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge & Company. I think Jerry Goldfeder was born, he may not agree, with politics in his blood. He practiced it for a long time. Now he protects it by assisting politicians and citizens as an outstanding election lawyer. And he's my guest today. Welcome. So you weren't interested at the very beginning in political science? And I don't mean when you were a year old, but I mean
at the very beginning.
When you were in high school, maybe?
In high school, absolutely. When I was 13, John Kennedy ran for president.
So there.
Then that changed my life.
That's pretty young, right?
That's pretty young.
Yeah. So how did it, I mean, where did you live?
I grew up in Brooklyn, in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. My family was not involved in politics. Every now and again, I would see people going around the block with their green sheets, getting petition signatures for candidates. It always struck me as pretty interesting what they were doing. Why were they doing that? And then when Kennedy ran for president, we were very involved. My teacher did it, of course. They got us involved. My teacher got us involved, like they continue to do with kids today.
In junior high school, right?
Actually, it was in elementary school.
Oh, in elementary school.
That's right.
My teacher at Joan of Arc Junior High School in 7th grade got me involved. I always loved it. I remember going into the booth with, I don't know if I can really say this, but I seem to remember going into the booth with my mother when she voted for Roosevelt the second time. I did because I wore a Roosevelt button. Anyway, it's a long story, but it's not about me today. Anyway, so once you got into it, did you really get hooked about it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it?
There's just something about it that's very exciting, important. You get a chance to be involved with like-minded people and to argue on behalf of what you think is important. And you always think that you could really make a change. And no matter how many times you hit your head against the wall, you still get up. I'm mixing my metaphors. You still get up and try to make change. You try to improve the world.
You have to think that, don't you?
Well, I think you have to think that.
But there are lots of people who don't think that.
Yeah, there are people
What's
in it,
the difference?
Have
you ever given thought to what it is that makes somebody feel that way or doesn't?
I'm not a psychologist.
Oh, all I know,
a scholar. All I know is that there have been studies that show that the people who are really involved in policy and then get involved in politics really put their heart and soul in it, and they succeed. They may win elections, they may lose elections, but they succeed in terms of changing the debate, putting their agenda on the table. That's important.
Not everybody does that.
Not everybody does it.
But outstanding ones do, right?
Yeah.
You said that kids get involved in grade school and stuff. I don't think enough kids do get involved. I mean, I studied civics in junior high school. I don't know if you had a class called that. Well,
No.
You taught political science in high school.
I taught political science in college.
In college.
In college, right. Well, my grandson right now, who's 12, lives in Massachusetts. His school, he's in the 6th grade, his school had a mock election. And they got very much involved. And needless to say, because he's part of my family, he's very involved. He was very involved in the election this time, as well as last time, even as an 8-year-old. But I thought it was terrific that they did that. And I have neighbors right now children of the same age here in New York, whose schools do the same thing. I think it's great that the teachers do that.
It's so important.
Very
because
important.
I think that's what helps you, and then you keep voting. You know,
Right.
That we know is important.
So do you remember
vote.
your very first vote?
Yes, it was 1952. I voted for Adlai Stevenson. It was a momentous year because you had to be 21 when I voted.
Well, when I voted my first time, it was 1968. I'm a little younger than you. And
everybody is.
You had to be 21 that year. And I couldn't vote for you, but Humphrey. now I'm revealing for the first time publicly, I didn't vote for Hubert Humphrey. Well, I knew that New York was going to go for Hubert Humphrey, so I had the luxury of making a protest vote. I voted for Eldridge Cleaver. He was running on the Peace and Freedom Party. And of course it was because of the war, because I was so involved against the war.
Right. But looking back, are you sorry more people didn't vote for Hubert Humphrey?
Well, in New York we did.
Yeah, but I mean in the country.
Oh, sure, of course.
Yeah.
It would have been a different world.
Right, it really would have been. So somebody once called me Mrs. Cleaver because of my name, Ronnie Eldridge. They got it mixed up in the conversation. So let's talk now about voting. We've established that we think it's very important, right? You represent people who want to get on the ballot or who are on the ballot, who win elections, who lose elections.
Right.
Yeah. Do you find, and from my understanding and what everything's been said this year, there is a very uneven process, A, for getting on the ballot, and B, for being able to vote in this country.
Right. You know, the voting is very important, but by the time we get to the voting booth, most of the decisions are already made. It's difficult to get on the ballot. In some states, it's very difficult. In New York, it's pretty difficult to get on the ballot, even though the laws have been liberalized. And so there's a winnowing process. Not everybody gets an opportunity to run. And then not everybody can raise the money in order to run a viable campaign. And so ballot access winnows candidates, not being able to raise enough money also deprives the voters of having certain candidates they'd like to vote for. So by the time Election Day rolls around in November, the choices have been narrowed considerably. Look at this last year's presidential election. Obviously, on the Democratic side, we had the president. The president was running for re-election. There was never a question about that. On the Republican side, it took quite a while for them to get through their primaries, but some of those candidates couldn't even get on the ballot in order to run in certain primaries. Now, you and I may not have a great deal of affection or respect for Newt Gingrich, just as an example. Right. But he is a considerable figure, former Speaker of the House, a serious candidate for President of the United States, could not get on the ballot in the important state of Virginia for the primary. Well, what does that tell us? And by the way, Rick Perry, governor of Texas, also couldn't. What does that tell us about the way we structure our primaries, the way we structure our elections? So while it's extremely important that everybody votes, we got to keep in mind that the whole system, until we get to the final act, is stacked against a lot of people and really deprives voters of choices.
It's incredible. What does a president have to do to qualify? What does a person who's running for president have to do to qualify? Anything?
Yes, you have to get on the ballot in the primary
in
every state.
It's not a universal thing.
Absolutely.
That's right.
We have a bizarre and unique system for electing presidents.
Right. That's true. So
we have 50 different elections for President of the United States. Actually 51, because we count Washington, D.C.
Yeah. So, and then when you go to vote, what you have to go through to be able to walk into get a ballot in your hand is also very difficult and also different across the board, right?
That's right. Every state has its own election law. Every state has its own regulations and mores in terms of the way elections are set up, who can get on the ballot, who could run for office, and then, of course, who can vote. Every state has its own eligibility requirements for people who can vote. And when you have to register is different in different states. Some states, North Dakota, you don't even have to register. You can show up on that day and vote. Well, wouldn't that be wonderful if people who at the last minute decide they want to vote for President of the United States, they can just show up and actually vote? Well, first of all, they shouldn't decide at the last minute, but let's assume they do. In the last few weeks, with all the TV commercials and so on, and the campaign is really in high gear, so they decide in the last few weeks. It may be too late. They may not be able to register in order to vote. And then, of course, where they vote is channeled in particular ways. you and I have to vote in a particular precinct where we live. And if we make a mistake and we go to a different polling place and our name is not in the book, they'll give us a provisional ballot, what we call
if we
in
know
New York,
enough to ask for it.
if we know enough to ask, but they're required to give it to us in New York, an affidavit ballot, it's called here. But it won't count because we went to the wrong polling place, even though it's for the President of the United States. And you want to vote for the President, and so you vote in one school rather than a different school. Well, why should that matter? As long as there's no fraud involved, why should that matter? So every state has all these restrictions to try. It's like an obstacle course to being able to register, who can run, who can be on the ballot, and then finally where you can vote and who you can vote for.
So it all goes back, what, to the Constitution that doesn't guarantee everybody a vote?
Right.
So we have to it's all the whole question of centralized government versus states' rights. Is that what it really is?
Well, it's not. That's what it goes back to.
Yeah.
When we formed this republic 230 some odd years ago, there was a real tension between the federal government and the states, and we gave the states the constitutional right and obligation to run our elections. So that's true for sheriff, for borough president, for city council, for president of the United States. The states run all the elections. So what an election administrator decides in Ohio for a particular county in Ohio can change the entire election. When the commissioner of elections in Florida in the year 2000 designed a ballot that she thought would be a good ballot for seniors. They'd be able to read it, it would be understandable, and she designed the ballot, we call it the butterfly ballot, that people were voting for Buchanan rather than Gore. So because she had the authority to design that ballot, and she did a really cockamamie job in doing it, thousands of people, including probably my parents at the time, voted for Buchanan instead of Gore, and therefore the entire country, that county went for Bush, Florida went for Bush, the country went for Bush because of that. So it's very, very localized in the way we run elections.
But there was recently a law by the Congress, wasn't it, about elections? What was that? The vow or whatever it is, voting.
Well, the Congress does have the right to override the state's own election codes, and they do from time to time. We have the Voting Rights Act.
Right. Usually as a result of that, right? Prior discrimination.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So from time to time, Congress will pass a law that overrides whatever the states might do. And my view is the Congress ought to take the bull by the horns and set up some national standardized rules for the way we conduct elections.
Will that ever happen?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
The leadership of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have to agree to it.
Yeah. It's so interesting because we were talking about this before. I just realized it, you knew it a long time ago, that the elections at the end of a decade, the state elections at the end of the decade, are so important because you then are electing the members of the state legislatures that then draw the lines for the congressional districts, right? And also run the elections basically in the state.
Right. So for example, in 2010, whoever the winning candidates for the state legislatures throughout the country had enormous power. That election was very important because not only did they draw lines for the congressional elections, but they drew lines for the state legislatures as well.
Right.
So it made a tremendous difference in
the composition of these houses.
of the Congress and the state legislatures.
And we saw that this year.
We saw it. And those legislative elections in 2010, because so many Republicans prevailed, they were able to pass these anti-voting laws, these voter suppression laws throughout the country. Democrats fought back. We went to court in many states, And every time we went to court, we won. But it was a constant battle. The Republican legislators passed laws to restrict voting. The Democrats went to court to lift those restrictions, and we were able to do it. But it caused a tremendous amount of confusion in various states, and it ultimately cost. It did result in some reduction in the ability of people being able to vote.
And it also, I think, must have had a result on the representatives in the Congress, in the House of Representatives.
Absolutely.
Drawing the districts.
Absolutely.
So.
And we saw that in New York. Some of the way
Right.
the congressional lines were drawn in New York were drawn to the benefit of Republicans.
We have more Republican members of Congress, New York State, and the Democrats have more voters in the state. Is that possible?
Sure, it's possible.
Is that?
It depends on how the lines are drawn.
Yeah.
And because we have a Republican state Senate and a Democratic Assembly, there wasn't an agreement as to what the lines were. So in our case, it wasn't because Republicans drew the line, because they didn't agree, the courts drew the lines.
Yeah. Could the governor have stopped that?
The governor could have persuaded all the parties to come together and work out their agreements,
Right.
work out an agreement.
Right.
He could have tried to do that.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean he would have succeeded, right?
So the national role, is there ever a chance that we will abolish the Electoral College?
Well, it doesn't appear that way. Every now and again, there's a bill put in the hopper to abolish the Electoral College. And the New York
That can be done
Times,
by a law, not an amendment?
no, it has to be done by an amendment to the Constitution. And there are all sorts of good government groups who call for abolishing the Electoral College. The New York Times writes an editorial about it every 5 minutes to abolish the Electoral College. It's a very good editorial, but apparently without any result. There needs to be tremendous political will to do so. Now, if in fact Obama had won, the president had won the Electoral College, and Romney had won the popular vote this year, then it would have been the exact opposite of what happened in 2000. Maybe then both parties would have come together and said, let's abolish the Electoral College. Because it has to go through the Congress, and then it has to go through 3/4 of the states. It's a very heavy lift to amend the Constitution. So I'm not too sanguine about it at all.
It would change the whole campaigning, wouldn't it?
Sure.
It would put New York in a much more exciting role in the national election.
That's right.
We would have to have all the campaigns here. We'd even see a candidate outside, not necessarily in someone's beautiful living room, right?
That's right. Raising money.
Right. Why is it that when we were younger, when I was younger, the candidates were here more often?
Well, New York wasn't as blue as consistently
I see,
as it is
yeah.
now.
That's right.
And
We had
in fact,
Thomas Dewey and yeah.
well, even in the 1960
Yeah, we
election,
had-
John Kennedy, I would like to say, barely won New York State. He won on the Democratic line. When you added, he won because you
Party.
added the Democratic and the Liberal Party line. So it wasn't a great victory, and it was a tough fight between Kennedy and Nixon. And for the most part, those historically, New York was pretty much up for grabs. Not the way it is now.
Yeah. So tell me, when you're an election lawyer and you help a presidential campaign, how do you do that? What do you do?
Well, one of the things I mentioned before, we've gone to court this entire year.
Does the campaign put together a team of attorneys?
Yes. Yeah,
From all over the
campaigns.
country?
Well, we have legal teams that are that put together by the presidential campaign. So there's about a dozen of us and many volunteer lawyers working throughout the country to go to court to stop the anti-voting laws, to make sure that people can vote relatively easily. Sometimes we'll go to court to make sure that ballot access is guaranteed. Obviously, on the Democratic side, we didn't have to do that this year for the president, but the Republican lawyers had to do that. So, especially after 2000, after Bush v. Gore,
That really
it's become
ignited
a
the
staple.
legal community?
Yes, it's become part and parcel of a campaign to put together a tight-knit legal team to represent the president, the presidential candidates, to make sure that all the laws that are enacted are good for your candidate, and if they're not, to fight them, and then to make sure that the laws are complied with. So it's a lot of work on the legal side, whereas it shouldn't be.
Right.
It shouldn't be that at all. It should be relatively easy to vote, and a campaign should be about candidates attracting voters with their ideas, but that's not reality any longer. So the legal team is unfortunately an important part of a presidential election.
So I want to know, all the little details. How does it get put together? Does it come from Washington to Chicago, for instance?
There's a council to the presidential campaign, and that council puts together a team of people.
Right. And then they call you and say, could you go to Colorado?
Well, it depends what the needs are.
Right.
I was ready to go to whatever state we needed to go to on the morning after the election.
It's not only before, it's then after.
Sure. If it were a close election, there was a small group of us that ready to go to, whether it was Colorado or Nevada, or Florida, Ohio. All our legal papers were ready to go into court to make certain that we won.
And when you traveled, did you pay for it? Or does the campaign pay for it? I like all these little details. That's what makes it all so interesting. You have to bring it down.
There are lawyers who are retained and paid, and there are lawyers who volunteer.
I see. So, do they have to pass a test? No, right? Now, campaign finance. Where do we stand with that?
We're in a situation where we've just spent, what is it, $6 billion on this presidential campaign, and what was the result? We landed up pretty much in the same place we were before we started the campaign. So you say to yourself, $6 billion for this? Look what we could have done with $6 billion.
We could have cleared Far Rockaway.
We could have cleared Far Rockaway. We could have rebuilt Breezy Point. We could have taken care of all the people who were suffering as a result of natural disasters and people who suffer as a result of our economic system.
So what has been the general reaction to this, do you think?
I think people are tired, have got very tired of the campaign. We're very happy that it's over, and it's as if it's ancient history already. So all the problems that we saw in the campaign relating to money, relating to ballot access, relating to voter ID, relating to what do you do when there's a natural disaster, you need to plan for an election, all these problems some of us will continue to address, but most of the world goes on.
So what do you think will happen with the financing? Do you think that the Congress will ever, they could override the Supreme Court decision, can't they? Not override it, they could pass a separate law.
That's right. Well, given the fact that we have a divided Congress, I think it's not going to occur at this point. But you need to take the long view, Ronnie. As I know you know that.
Yeah, but
you need to take the long view.
I'm getting older.
I understand. Time is running out,
right.
And we want the world to be better than
right.
the way it is.
Absolutely.
Believe me, I appreciate that. And we just need to continue to seek ways to reform the system, to make it fairer, to make money have less of a role.
So political activists really have to concentrate on the election for the House 2 years from now.
That's right.
And whose responsibility does that become? The Democratic National Committee, the Republican National Committee? Is it local people, or is it a combination of both?
Well, it's a combination. We certainly never want to leave it in the hands of the leadership of the parties. They have their interests. We always want to make certain that citizens are involved, that younger people are involved. We saw that in this campaign. There are a lot of younger people involved in this campaign, and people need to continue to do that. People from CUNY, for example, they need to continue to be involved in this campaign to elect local people who are progressive, to elect congresspeople who are progressive, to reform our laws so that the democratic process is more open and works better.
And if they understood, I mean, that how everything is interrelated. I mean, if you've got a Democratic Senate and you don't have the Democratic House, as you just said, we will probably never see the legislation that might improve campaign finance or any of these other things. So it's not just every 4 years. It's really
certainly not
all
every
the time.
4 years. It's constant.
Is
It's a continuous process.
we have an election coming up in the city. Is New York City's campaign finance law one of the best in the country?
It is, as a matter of fact.
Is it the best? Who else
I think
has
it is the best, actually.
Yeah.
Because people get a chance to get $6 for every dollar you raise, up to a certain amount, and it enables more people to run for citywide office, but especially for city council, for local offices. It's a good system because it opens it up.
So what should we be doing about that? Just supporting it?
We should be supporting it, that's right. And we should be trying to export it to other cities and other states. In New York State, for example, we don't have the kind of campaign finance laws that we have for New York City. It would be great if we had public financing like we have for New York City throughout New York State. Because otherwise we have candidates running for the state senate, for the assembly, for governor, for attorney general, who raise millions and millions of dollars, and they have to.
And then we know what happens then, or the
What do we
interconnection
mean?
with lobbyists and money coming in.
Well,
That's part of politics.
That's part of politics,
Yeah.
and that happens even when there's a campaign finance system.
So when did the petition start for the mayoral campaign?
Well, full disclosure, I represent the next mayor of the city of New York, Christine Quinn. The primary is in September, so petitions start being circulated in June.
June.
Yeah.
And then there's a runoff in this.
For city,
Could be.
a runoff.
And what creates the runoff?
Well, and this is only for citywide
Right.
positions.
Not for borough president or
No,
anything else.
no, for mayor, controller, and public advocate. The candidate gets 40% in the primary, then there's no runoff. Candidate doesn't get 40%, then the top two vote getters go into a runoff 2 weeks later.
2 weeks later.
That's the current law.
Right. There was talk, wasn't there? I guess there was.
There is talk to move up the primary
to June.
To June
Which is what used to be.
in the old days.
In the old
days.
1970s. Well, that brings us to the end of this program. My dear old friend, Jerry Goldfeder, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.